A billionaire's empire can be shattered by a single sentence. For Julian Sterling, a man who moved markets with a whisper, that sentence wasn't spoken in a boardroom or a courtroom. It was spoken in a language he thought was his secret weapon, by a waitress he thought was invisible. He walked into the city's most exclusive restaurant expecting to close a deal that would make him untouchable. He planned to celebrate his cunning and his power. But he never imagined that the quiet woman refilling his water glass held the key to his past, his present, and his complete and utter downfall. This is the story of how one woman's forgotten history became a titan's final reckoning. The clinking of silver against porcelain was the background music of Eleanor Vance's life. It was a delicate, expensive sound, a world away from the rattling pipes in her tiny apartment, or the strained hum of the oxygen machine by her mother's bed. Here at Aurea Manhattan's pinnacle of fine dining sorrow and struggle were checked at the door like heavy winter coats. The patrons who glided across the marble floors lived in a different reality, one cushioned by wealth and insulated by influence. Elena was merely a ghost at their feast, a silent observer in a crisp black uniform, trained to be present but unseen. Tonight the air was particularly thick with the scent of power. It wasn't just the expensive perfume or the earthy aroma of black truffle being shaved over handmade pasta. It was a palpable energy, an arrogant hum that radiated from Table 12, the most coveted reservation in the house. That's where Julian Sterling was holding court. Elena knew the name. Everyone did. Sterling Dynamics was a leviathan, a multinational conglomerate with tentacles in everything from tech to pharmaceuticals. Julian Sterling was its face, a man in his late 50s with a mane of silver hair, a jawline that looked carved from granite, and eyes the color of a winter sky, cold clear and missing any hint of warmth. He was a regular at Aurea, known for his extravagant tips and his equally extravagant cruelty. He treated the staff like pieces of furniture, interchangeable and inanimate. Elena watched him from across the room as she meticulously polished a wine glass, her movements economical and precise. She had perfected the art of invisibility. She kept her gaze low, her expression neutral, her steps silent. It was a survival mechanism. But behind the placid mask of a professional waitress, her mind was a whirlwind of activity. She wasn't just observing, she was studying. She noted the way Sterling's younger companion, a man in his early 30s named Marcus Thorne, fidgeted with his tie whenever Sterling spoke. She saw the flash of fear in his eyes, quickly suppressed. She saw the way Sterling enjoyed that fear, the way it fed his ego like a fine wine. For Elena, this job was a penance and a prison. 5 years ago, she had been on a different trajectory. She was top of her class at Columbia Business School, fluent in 3 languages, with a full scholarship for a master's program in international finance at the University of Heidelberg in Germany. She had a brilliant future, mapped out on where she would follow in her father's footsteps. Robert Vance had been a different kind of businessman. He ran a small but innovative tech firm, Vance Innovations, built on a foundation of ethics and loyalty to his employees. He believed you could succeed without sacrificing your soul. Julian Sterling had proven him wrong. The memory was a raw, open wound. Sterling Dynamics had initiated a hostile takeover. It was a brutal, merciless campaign. Sterling had used shell companies to manipulate stock prices, spread malicious rumors to discredit her father, and bled his company dry in legal battles he knew Robert couldn't afford. The stress had triggered a massive stroke, leaving her father a shadow of his former self until he passed away a year later. The company his life's work was dismantled and sold for parts. The family was left with nothing but a mountain of medical bills and legal debt. Elena had to drop out of her master's program, abandoning her dreams to come home and care for her mother, whose health had deteriorated under the strain. The only job she could get that offered flexible hours and cash tips was this one. So she traded spreadsheets for tablecloths and corporate negotiations for taking dinner orders, but she never forgot the name Julian Sterling. It was seared into her memory, the embodiment of everything that had gone wrong in her life. Tonight, as she carried a heavy tray of sparkling water and artisanal bread to his table, her heart hammered against her ribs. It was the first time she'd been assigned to his section. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named David, had insisted, "He's a big tipper, Eleanor. Just smile and don't say a word unless you're spoken to." She approached the table, her footsteps silent on the plush carpet. Sterling didn't even look up. He was leaning in, speaking to Marcus in a low conspiratorial tone. "And the board is spineless. They'll fold by Friday," Sterling was saying, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Are you sure about the intel?" Marcus asked, his voice betraying his nervousness. "If this leaks—" "Leak," Sterling scoffed. He gestured dismissively at the room around them. "Look at these people. They're too busy taking pictures of their food to notice a thing. As for the staff—" He finally flicked his eyes toward Eleanor as she placed a bottle of San Pellegrino on the table. His gaze was utterly devoid of recognition. He saw a uniform, not a person, a function, not a human being. He then turned back to Marcus, and with a patronizing smirk, switched to fluent German. "Don't worry about her," he said, his voice dripping with condescension as he gestured vaguely at Elena. "Look at her. Probably can't even string 2 words of English together properly. She's just part of the scenery. Utterly irrelevant." Elena's hand, holding the silver water pitcher, didn't so much as tremble. She continued her task, her face an unreadable mask. Inside a fire that had been smouldering for 5 long years roared to life. He thought she was scenery. He thought she was irrelevant. He had no idea the ghost of the man he'd destroyed was standing right beside him, ready to become his living nightmare. The German words hung in the air between the 2 men, a bubble of perceived privacy in the crowded restaurant. Julian Sterling leaned back in his chair, the very picture of arrogance. He relished these moments, the casual assertion of dominance, the use of a foreign language as both a tool and a weapon. It was a way of reminding Marcus and himself that they operated on a different plane than the common people who served them. Elena continued her duties with a chilling, almost supernatural calm. She filled Marcus's water glass, then moved to Sterling's. Her movements were fluid, economical, betraying none of the turmoil within. Her mind, however, was racing. Her years in Heidelberg hadn't just given her a master's-level understanding of finance. They had immersed her in the language and culture. She spoke German with the easy fluency of a native, a detail of her past she had long since buried, along with her ambitions. Sterling, emboldened by his own cleverness, and Elena's apparent obliviousness, continued his diatribe in German, his voice a low, confident rumble. "The key, Marcus, is controlled demolition," he explained, swirling the expensive Bordeaux in his glass. "You don't just buy a company like Ethelred Group. You break it first. You find the cracks, you plant the seeds of doubt. A rumor here, a short sell there. You make the board panic." Elena's heart skipped a beat. Ethelred Group. The name had been all over the financial news for weeks, a promising biotech firm on the verge of a breakthrough in Alzheimer's research. Its stock had suddenly and inexplicably collapsed. There were whispers of a data breach, a failed clinical trial, but nothing concrete. The CIO, a well-respected scientist named Dr. Alistair Finch, had been devastated. The company was now vulnerable, a wounded animal waiting for a predator. But the regulators— Marcus began his German less confident than Sterling's, tinged with a slight American accent. The SEC is already sniffing around the unusual trading volume. Sterling let out a short, barking laugh that made a nearby couple glance over. He didn't care. He felt invincible. The SEC is a toothless dog chasing its own tail. They're looking for a complex algorithm. They're looking for a Wall Street conspiracy. They will never find Project Nightingale. He said the name Project Nightingale with a connoisseur's satisfaction, as if savoring a rare vintage. It's a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands, laundered through 3 other holding companies. Untraceable. It's the entity that initiated the short positions. By the time they find the breadcrumbs, the trail will be ice cold, and we will have already acquired Ethelred's patents for pennies on the dollar. Elena's blood ran cold. This wasn't just corporate raiding. This was a criminal conspiracy. The casual, boastful way he described it, the sheer lack of morality, was sickeningly familiar. It was the exact same playbook he had used to destroy her father. The shell companies, the market, manipulation, the manufactured panic, it was all there. He hadn't just ruined her family. It was his signature move, a blueprint for destruction he used over and over again. She placed the bread basket on the table, the scent of warm rosemary filling the air. Her mind was a steel trap, recording every word, every name, every detail. Project Nightingale, the Cayman Islands, the short positions. Sterling, now enjoying his own monologue, gestured toward Elena again with his wine glass, a cruel twist to his lips. You see, my boy, this is how the world really works. It's not about hard work or innovation. That's a fairy tale for the middle class. It's about power, about seeing the pieces on the board and being willing to do what others are not. He took a slow sip of wine. It's about recognizing who is a player and who is furniture. He eyed Eleanor up and down, his gaze lingering with dismissive contempt, like our little waitress here. What do you think her story is? Mountains of student debt for a useless degree? A couple of kids with a deadbeat husband? It doesn't matter. Her role in life is to fill my glass so I can get on with the business of changing the world. Marcus looked deeply uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat and mumbled a non-committal response in German. Yes, of course, Julian. That was the final straw. It wasn't just the insult, vile as it was. It was the casual dehumanization, the absolute certainty of his superiority, the belief that people like her were less than nothing. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a cancer. A man who believed his wealth gave him the right to treat the rest of humanity as his personal property. Elena straightened up. For a moment, she allowed the mask to slip. Her eyes, usually downcast and deferential, lifted and met Julian Sterling's. For the first time all evening, he was forced to truly look at her, not as a function, but as a person. He saw not the blank slate of a servant, but a spark of something cold and hard and intelligent. A flicker of surprise registered on his face before his arrogant smirk returned. He had no idea that in that single moment of eye contact, a 5-year plan for survival had just transformed into a 5-second plan for retribution. The ghost he had created was about to speak, and she would do it in a language he would understand perfectly. The moment hung in the air, stretched taut like a wire. Julian Sterling held Elena's gaze for a fraction of a second longer than he intended, a faint, almost imperceptible frown creasing his brow. There was something in her eyes, a flicker of defiance, an intelligence that felt jarringly out of place with her uniform. He dismissed it as a trick of the light, the impertinence of the lower classes, and turned back to Marcus, ready to continue his lecture on the art of corporate predation. Elena took a single deliberate step back from the table. She smoothed her apron, her hands steady. The entire restaurant seemed to fade into a dull, muffled roar in her ears. The only thing that was real was table 12, the two men sitting there, and the torrent of words she was about to unleash. She had a choice. She could let it go. She could retreat into the shadows, finish her shift, and go home to her quiet life of grief and obligation. She could take the information she had just heard and try to figure out what to do with it later. It was the safe path, the sensible path. But looking at Julian Sterling's smug face, the face that haunted her dreams, she knew that safety was no longer an option. Justice, she realized with a terrifying clarity, wasn't something you waited for. Sometimes you had to drag it into the light, kicking and screaming. She cleared her throat. It was not a timid little cough, but a clear, attention-grabbing sound. Both men looked up, annoyed by the interruption. Sterling's face clouded over with irritation. "If we need something, we will signal you," he said in English, his tone sharp and dismissive, as if scolding a misbehaving dog. Elena didn't flinch. She looked directly at him, her expression calm, her posture poised. And then in flawless academic German, with the crisp, precise accent of the Heidelberg intellectual community, she spoke. "Pardon the interruption, Mr. Sterling." The effect was instantaneous and profound. It was as if a switch had been flipped, plunging the scene into an eerie slow motion. Julian Sterling froze. The wine glass halfway to his lips stopped dead in the air. His eyes widened, the pupils contracting into pinpricks of shock. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty grey mask of disbelief. He looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Marcus Thorne physically recoiled his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. He stared at Elena, his mouth agape, his face a mixture of terror and utter confusion. The other patrons were oblivious, their chatter and laughter continuing to fill the grand dining room. But at table 12, a pocket of absolute silence had fallen, a vacuum created by a handful of simple German words. Elena pressed her advantage, her voice remaining level, calm, and lethally precise. She continued in German each word, a carefully placed stone building a wall around them. "I just wanted to clarify something you mentioned. When you discussed Project Nightingale, you referred to it as a Cayman Islands entity. While that is its registration point, I believe its primary holding account is funneled through the Liechtenstein Global Trust. It provides better anonymity against SEC subpoenas, does it not? A clever, if highly illegal, maneuver." Sterling's jaw worked, but no sound came out. The arrogant, powerful billionaire had vanished, replaced by a stunned, cornered animal. The color was beginning to return to his face, but it was a dark, mottled red of pure rage. Marcus looked like he was about to be physically ill. He darted a terrified glance at Sterling, then back at Elena, as if trying to comprehend how their waitress had just recited the deepest, most criminal secret of their entire operation. Elena wasn't finished. She held Sterling's furious gaze, her own eyes like chips of ice. "And your commentary on my life was illuminating," she continued, her German still flowing with unnerving fluency. "You speculate about student debt and useless degrees. I do have student debt, it's true. It's for a master's in international finance, which I had to abandon. From the University of Heidelberg. My thesis was on the very subject of forensic accounting and the detection of offshore shell corporations used for market manipulation." She let that sink in for a moment. The air crackled with unspoken violence. Sterling's knuckles were white where he gripped his wine glass. She could see the frantic calculations happening behind his eyes as he tried to understand who she was, what this was. And then she delivered the killing blow. She switched back to perfect, clear English, her voice now loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. "But you're right about one thing, Mr. Sterling. My life story is quite tragic. And you should know, because you wrote the first chapter." She paused, allowing the silence to stretch. "My name is Elena Vance. My father was Robert Vance. And you didn't just destroy his company, you destroyed my family. And I just heard you confess to how you're doing it all over again to Dr. Finch at Ethelred Group." The name Vance hung in the air. Sterling's face, which had been a mask of rage, crumbled into one of dawning, horrified recognition. The ghost at the feast had finally named herself. The irrelevant waitress, the piece of furniture, had just exposed everything. The world snapped back into focus. The hushed whispers from the adjacent table, a dropped fork clattering onto the marble floor, the distant murmur of the kitchen, it all came rushing back in. But for Julian Sterling, the only sound was a roaring in his ears. Elena Vance. Robert Vance's daughter. The name echoed in the chambers of his memory, a minor business dealing from years ago, a gnat he had swatted without a second thought. Now that gnat had returned as a hornet, and its sting was lethal. What is the meaning of this? He finally stammered, his voice a hoarse croak. He tried to project authority, but it came out as a strangled gasp. He was flailing his carefully constructed universe, tilting off its axis. "I believe I made the meaning perfectly clear," Elena replied, her English crisp and unwavering. She stood taller now, no longer the deferential waitress, but an avenging angel in a black apron. Her voice carried, and heads were beginning to turn. The couple at the next table were now openly staring, their forks suspended over their plates of risotto. "This is absurd," Sterling spat, slamming his wine glass down. Red wine sloshed over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth like a splash of blood. "I will have you fired. I will sue you for slander security." He looked wildly around the room, but no one moved. His power, his aura of invincibility had been punctured. All anyone saw was a red-faced, sputtering man being calmly confronted by a young woman half his age. Marcus Thorne was as pale as a ghost. He looked from Sterling to Elena and back again, his eyes wide with panic. He was an accessory. He had listened, he had participated. His career, his future was flashing before his eyes. Elena ignored Sterling's threats. They were the hollow bluster of a king who had just been dethroned. She turned her attention to Marcus. "And you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice softening slightly, but losing none of its steel. "You seem like a man who still has a conscience. You know that what he is doing to the Ethelred Group is not just unethical, it's criminal. You know he's destroying the life's work of a good man, Dr. Alistair Finch, not to mention the retirement funds of thousands of employees, all for a quick profit." Marcus flinched as if she had struck him. He couldn't meet her eyes. He stared down at his plate, at the expensive food he could no longer eat. The restaurant manager David was now scurrying towards them, his face a mask of frantic anxiety. "Is there a problem here, Mr. Sterling?" he asked, wringing his hands. This employee is harassing me," Sterling roared, pointing a trembling finger at Elena. "She's insane. I want her removed immediately." David looked at Elena, his expression a mixture of fear and confusion. "Elena, what's going on? Go to the back now." But Elena stood her ground. "David, mister, Sterling was just confessing to a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme," she said calmly, in German. He assumed I couldn't understand him. He called it Project Nightingale. The name, spoken again in the open, seemed to suck the air out of Sterling's lungs. The fight drained from his face, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. He had to get out of there. He had to control the damage. He threw his napkin onto the table and stood up so abruptly that his chair screeched backwards. "This is preposterous. I will not be subjected to the ravings of a lunatic. Marcus, we're leaving. He strode toward the exit, his movements stiff and jerky. He didn't glide with his usual predatory grace. He fled. Marcus, after a moment of panicked hesitation, scrambled to follow, nearly tripping over the chair in his haste. He cast one last terrified look back at Eleanor. It was a look that pleaded for forgiveness, a look that screamed of regret. The entire dining room was now silent, all eyes on the scene. Patrons had their phones out, discreetly recording the unraveling of one of the city's most powerful men. Elena watched them go, her heart pounding, but her resolve firm. She had done it. She had thrown the grenade. Now she just had to survive the explosion. David, the manager, turned on her, his voice a furious whisper. Are you out of your mind, Vance? Do you know who that was? You're fired. Get your things and get out. You'll be lucky if he doesn't sue this restaurant into oblivion. Elena simply nodded. She had known this would be the price. She calmly untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the now empty, wine-stained table 12. I understand, she said, her voice steady. She looked around the opulent room one last time, at the gilded ceilings and the shocked faces of the wealthy patrons. For 5 years, this place had been her cage. Tonight, she had not only broken free, but she had also set fire to the zookeeper's house on her way out. As she walked toward the staff exit, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The message contained only 3 words, I can help. She knew instinctively that it was from Marcus Thorne. The alliance she had gambled on had just been formed. The real fight was just beginning. The back alley behind Aria was a world away from the dining room's gilded elegance. It smelled of stale grease, wet cardboard, and despair. Elena leaned against the cold brick wall, the adrenaline that had sustained her finally beginning to ebb, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its place. The weight of what she had just done settled upon her. She had lost her job, her only source of income. She had publicly accused one of the most powerful and litigious men in New York City of massive fraud. She was David against a Goliath who owned his own army. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the same number. Don't go home. He'll have people watching you. Meet me at the St. James coffee shop on Lex. 30 minutes. Come alone. A fresh jolt of fear, cold and sharp, cut through her exhaustion. Of course, Sterling would have people watch her. He wouldn't just be angry. He would be in full-blown damage control mode. He would want to know who she was, who she had talked to, and most importantly, what she was going to do next. He would try to silence her through intimidation lawsuits or worse. But the text from Marcus was a lifeline. It was a confirmation that she had not just made a mortal enemy. She had also perhaps gained a crucial ally. Marcus was on the inside. He was weak, yes, and clearly terrified of Sterling, but he had a conscience. And in a battle against a man like Julian Sterling, a conscience was a rare and valuable weapon. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Eleanor pulled the hood of her thin jacket over her head, melting into the late-night shadows of the city. She took a circuitous route, doubling back twice and taking the subway one stop in the wrong direction before switching trains just in case. Every person who glanced at her for a second too long seemed like one of Sterling's men. The city she had always known suddenly felt hostile, its dark corners filled with unseen threats. The St. James was a small, unassuming coffee shop, the kind of place that was easily overlooked. Marcus was already there, tucked into a booth in the back corner, nursing a cup of black coffee. He looked even worse than he had at the restaurant. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie was loosened, and his face was pale and slick with a nervous sweat. He looked up as she approached, his eyes darting around the room. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I don't have much time. Why are you doing this? Elena asked, sliding into the booth opposite him. She didn't have time for pleasantries. She needed to know if he was genuine or if this was some kind of trap. Marcus ran a shaky hand through his hair. Because you were right, he said, his voice laced with self-loathing. About my conscience. I've been working for Sterling for 4 years. I've seen him do things. Bend the rules, cut corners. I told myself it was just aggressive business. But this Ethelred deal, it's different. Dr. Finch is a good man. His research could save millions of lives, and Sterling is destroying it all just to get his hands on the patents so he can sell them to the highest bidder. He took a ragged breath. And then what you said about your father. I looked it up on my phone as we were leaving. Vance Innovations. It was all there. The hostile takeover, the stock manipulation. It was before my time, but it's the same pattern. Exactly the same. Sterling didn't invent a new way to destroy Ethelred. He just dusted off an old one. He finally met her eyes, and she saw a flicker of resolve there, a desperate need for redemption. I can't be a part of it anymore. When you spoke up, you gave me a choice. I can either go down with him, or I can try to do the right thing. Elena felt a sliver of hope. What can you give me everything? Marcus whispered, leaning forward. I have access to the internal servers. The real ones, not the sanitized versions they keep for the auditors. I can get you the internal memos about Project Nightingale, the offshore account numbers in Liechtenstein, the encrypted communications between Sterling and the brokers who initiated the short sell. It's all there. It's the entire blueprint of the crime. This was it. The motherlode. Her public accusation was one thing, but hard documentary evidence was undeniable. It was the kind of thing that didn't just generate headlines. It generated federal indictments. But there's a problem. Marcus continued, his voice dropping even lower. The system is highly secure. If I try to download that much data at once, it will trigger an immediate security alert and lock me out. I have to be smart about it. And I need a secure way to get it to you, a way that can't be traced back to either of us. For the next hour, they huddled in the dimly lit coffee shop, two unlikely conspirators planning the downfall of a titan. Elena's mind, once laser-focused on corporate finance strategy, was now deep in the world of espionage. They devised a plan involving encrypted USB drives, dead drops in crowded subway stations and burner phones. It felt like something out of a spy movie, but the danger was terrifyingly real. There's one more thing you need to know, Marcus said, as they prepared to leave. Sterling isn't just going to sue you. He's going to try and destroy you. He has a team of private investigators, on retainer ruthless people, led by a man named Richard Corbin. They will dig into every corner of your life. They will harass your family, interview your old friends, look for any mistake you've ever made, and use it to paint you as an unstable, vindictive liar. You need to be prepared. The mention of her family sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. Her mother. She was so fragile. Just get me the evidence. Marcus Eleanor said, her voice hard as flint. Let him send his monsters. I've been living with the one he created for 5 years. I'm not afraid of his ghosts anymore. They left the coffee shop separately, disappearing into the vast, indifferent city. Elena walked for a long time, her mind a maelstrom of fear and fierce determination. She was no longer just a victim of Julian Sterling's cruelty. She was now the leader of a 2-person insurrection armed with nothing but a thirst for justice and the promise of proof. The war had begun. The days that followed were a masterclass in paranoia. Elena felt the oppressive weight of unseen noise everywhere she went. A van parked across the street from her apartment building for too long. A man reading a newspaper on the park bench she passed every morning. Every shadow held a potential threat. Richard Corbin's team, just as Marcus had warned, was already at work. Her landlord received a visit from a man claiming to be a credit investigator, asking pointed questions about her lifestyle and visitors. An old professor from Columbia got a call from someone posing as a journalist, trying to dig up any academic or personal dirt from her past. They were trying to build a weapon of character assassination to be deployed when the time was right. Elena moved with purpose, her every action deliberate. She communicated with Marcus only through a specially purchased burner phone using prearranged coded phrases. Their first exchange of information was a nerve-wracking affair straight out of a Cold War thriller. The dead drop was set for the Union Square subway station during the evening rush hour. Elena, dressed in nondescript clothes with a baseball cap pulled low, waited by a specific trash receptacle near the NR line. The plan was for Marcus to walk past, and in the jostle of the crowd, drop a small package into her open tote bag. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. The roar of the trains, the screech of metal wheels, the cacophony of 1,000 conversations, all merged into a disorienting wall of sound. Elena's heart hammered in her chest. What if Marcus had been caught? What if this was a setup? What if Sterling himself was watching from somewhere? Then she saw him. He was walking with the flow of the crowd, his face pale and grim, a copy of the Wall Street Journal tucked under his arm. As he passed her, he stumbled slightly, bumping into her. It was over in a second. He mumbled an apology and was gone, swallowed by the river of commuters. Elena's hand went to her bag. She felt it. A small, hard object wrapped in the newspaper. A USB drive. She didn't dare go straight home. She rode the subway for an hour, changing trains 3 times before finally making her way to the 24-hour section of the New York Public Library. Using one of their public terminals, a machine that couldn't be traced back to her, she carefully inserted the drive. Her breath caught in her throat as she opened the first file. It was a password-protected, encrypted folder. Marcus had given her the key in a coded text, the date of her father's death. The symbolism was a punch to the gut. As the files decrypted, the full scope of Julian Sterling's criminality laid itself bare on the screen. It was all there, a digital ghost trail of his greed. There were internal emails stamped with Sterling Dynamics letterheads, explicitly outlining the strategy to destabilize Ethelred's market position prior to acquisition. There were wire transfer receipts from Sterling Dynamics to Project Nightingale, the Cayman Islands shell company. There were spreadsheets detailing the precise timing of the short sells coordinated to coincide with anonymous false rumors planted on investor message boards by a shadowy PR firm on Sterling's payroll. Most damning of all was a series of audio files. Marcus, growing increasingly paranoid, had started secretly recording his meetings with Sterling. Elena clicked on the most recent one, dated just 2 days before the dinner at Aria. Sterling's voice filled her headphones, smooth and confident. Finch is an idealist, a scientist. He won't know what hit him. The beauty of the Nightingale strategy is its plausible deniability. By the time anyone pieces it together, we'll own the patents, the company will be a tax write-off, and Alistair Finch will be just another sob story. Elena felt a cold fury wash over her. It was the voice of a man playing God, moving human lives around like chess pieces, utterly devoid of empathy or remorse. She saved a copy of everything onto a second new drive she had brought, then meticulously scrubbed her presence from the library computer. Over the next week, 2 more dead drops followed. Each one yielded a new trove of evidence, another layer of the conspiracy. Marcus was risking everything, methodically smuggling out the digital guts of Sterling's operation. He provided the timeline, the names of the brokers involved, the offshore bank account numbers in Liechtenstein. It was a complete airtight case. While Marcus was her source, Elena became the strategist. Her abandoned finance education came roaring back to life. She spent her days in the library, piecing everything together, cross-referencing dates, and weaving the disparate pieces of data into a coherent and devastating narrative. She wasn't just compiling evidence, she was writing the indictment. She created a detailed timeline, a list of key players, and a summary that explained the complex financial maneuvers in simple, undeniable terms. She knew this evidence was too powerful for a lawsuit. A civil case would get tied up in legal maneuvers for years, and Sterling had deeper pockets than God. This wasn't about money. This was about justice. The evidence needed to go somewhere. It couldn't be buried or bought. It needed to go to the one institution. Sterling couldn't control the free press. There was only one journalist she trusted, a woman whose reputation for tenacious, fearless reporting on corporate crime was legendary Sarah Jenkins of the Financial Times. Jenkins had a Pulitzer for bringing down a corrupt hedge fund manager a few years back. She couldn't be intimidated or bribed. Elena composed a carefully worded anonymous email from a secure, encrypted service. Subject: the truth about the Ethelred Group collapse. Dear Ms. Jenkins, you have been reporting on the mysterious downfall of Ethelred Group. The official story is wrong. It was not a data breach or a failed trial. It was a targeted, illegal act of market manipulation orchestrated by Julian Sterling of Sterling Dynamics. This is not speculation. I have irrefutable proof, internal emails, wire transfers, and audio recordings of Sterling himself detailing the entire criminal scheme. This proof also connects him to a similar case from years ago, involving a company called Vance Innovations. I know you are a journalist who values truth above all else. If you are interested in the biggest corporate crime story of the year, a story that will lead to federal indictments, I am prepared to give you everything. Let me know how to proceed securely. She hit send. The message flew out into the digital ether. Now all she could do was wait and pray that the world was about to hear her roar. The response from Sarah Jenkins came less than 6 hours later. It was brief and professional, containing only a set of instructions for establishing a secure line of communication and a time for a preliminary call. There was no skepticism, no dismissal, only the focused readiness of a veteran journalist who smelled blood in the water. Elena felt a surge of validation. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't alone in her fight. Their first call was a tense, anonymous affair. Elena, using a voice modulator and a secure line from a payphone, a relic she'd had to search 3 neighborhoods to find, laid out the broad strokes of the case. She mentioned Project Nightingale, the Shell Corporation, and the audio recordings. Sarah Jenkins listened intently, her silence more engaging than another person's questions. When Eleanor finished, Jenkins's voice was calm and serious. I've been digging into Ethelred for weeks. My sources at the SEC mentioned whispers of a Nightingale entity, but they couldn't pin it down. What you're describing, it fits the missing pieces of the puzzle. I need to see the evidence, all of it. They arranged the final, most dangerous transfer. Not a dead drop, but a face-to-face meeting in a neutral public place where they could both be sure they weren't being followed. They met 2 days later on the Staten Island ferry, surrounded by tourists snapping photos of the Statue of Liberty. There were 2 anonymous women in the crowd, Elena wearing sunglasses and a scarf, and Sarah, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s with piercing, intelligent eyes. They didn't speak much. Elena simply passed over a plain brown envelope. Inside was the USB drive. "Everything is on there," Elena said, her voice low. "The timeline I created should be the first file you open. It will guide you through the rest. The audio files are the most important." Jenkins took the envelope, her fingers closing around the drive. She looked Eleanor directly in the eye. "You've taken an incredible risk. Why?" Eleanor thought of her father, of her mother's weary face, of the years of suffocating grief. "Because men like Julian Sterling believe they are above the law," she said. "They believe people like me are invisible. I just want to prove him wrong." Sarah Jenkins simply nodded. "If what you've given me is what you say it is, he'll find out just how wrong he was." What followed was a week of agonizing silence. Elena knew that Jenkins and her team would be in lockdown, verifying every document, cross-referencing every claim and preparing the story for publication. Meanwhile, the pressure from Sterling's side was intensifying. Richard Corbin's investigators were becoming more brazen. A building inspector tried to gain access to her apartment, claiming a gas leak. Elena, knowing it was a lie, refused him entry and called the police, who confirmed no such inspection was scheduled. Sterling was getting desperate. He knew a fuse had been lit. He just didn't know how long it was. Then, on a Tuesday morning, the bomb detonated. The headline was splashed across the front page of the Financial Times. Both in print and online, Sterling Dynamics implicated in multi-million-dollar fraud. Leaked files and audio reveal illegal plot to destroy Ethelred Group. The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. Sarah Jenkins had laid out the entire conspiracy in meticulous, damning detail. She quoted from the internal emails. She described the wire transfers to Project Nightingale. She embedded excerpts of the audio recordings in the online version, allowing the entire world to hear Julian Sterling, in his own voice, boasting about his criminal enterprise. The article also drew the direct line back to the destruction of Vance Innovations 5 years earlier, painting a portrait of a serial corporate predator. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. By the time the New York Stock Exchange opened, at 9:30 a.m., Sterling Dynamics stock was in freefall. Trading had to be halted twice within the first hour to prevent a total collapse. The board of directors convened an emergency meeting, and by noon had announced that Julian Sterling was taking an indefinite leave of absence. By sundown, he had been formally fired, and the company had announced a full internal investigation. The legal repercussions were just as swift. The SEC, armed with the public evidence and facing immense pressure, announced a formal investigation. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, citing the evidence in the FT article, convened a grand jury. Elena watched the news unfold from her small apartment, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. It was surreal watching the empire of the man who had shattered her world crumble to dust in a matter of hours on live television. 3 days later, the moment of true catharsis arrived. News channels cut to live footage from outside Julian Sterling's palatial Fifth Avenue penthouse. 2 stern-faced FBI agents in dark suits were escorting a man in handcuffs to a black sedan. It was Sterling. His silver hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was rumpled, and his face was a ghastly mixture of rage, disbelief, and abject terror. He looked small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. As they pushed his head down to get him into the car, he looked up for a moment, his eyes meeting the glare of a dozen news cameras. The cold, powerful gaze was gone, replaced by the wild, desperate look of a man who had lost everything. Marcus Thorne, having cooperated fully with Sarah Jenkins, and later with the FBI, was treated as a key witness. He would face professional consequences, but he avoided prison. Dr. Alistair Finch, the CEO of Ethelred, announced that with Sterling's scheme exposed, the company was able to secure emergency funding and would survive. Elena felt no elation, no triumphant joy. Only a profound, quiet sense of peace. It was over. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served. She looked over at her mother, who was asleep in her chair, a gentle smile on her face for the first time in years. The ghost at the feast had finally found her rest. She hadn't just exposed a billionaire, she had reclaimed her family's name and honored her father's memory in the most powerful way imaginable. She had proven that in the end, integrity was a more valuable currency than all the money in the world. 1 year later, the scent of old paper and brewing coffee had replaced the cloying aroma of expensive perfume and truffle oil in Eleanor's life. She now sat not in the shadows of a grand dining room, but in a modest, light-filled office in a repurposed Brooklyn loft. The sign on the frosted glass door didn't say ARIA. It read, "The Vance Foundation for Corporate Ethics." The fury of the media storm had long since passed. Julian Sterling, convicted on multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and market manipulation, was now just a number in the federal prison system. His empire dismantled his name, a permanent stain in the annals of business history. The reward money Elena received from the SEC's whistleblower program was substantial, but it was what she chose to do with it that defined her victory. She hadn't returned to the cutthroat world of corporate finance she was once destined for. The battle against Sterling hadn't rekindled her ambition for wealth. It had forged in her a profound sense of purpose. She had seen the rot in the system from the inside out, and she was now dedicated to helping those who, like her father, were crushed by its gears. The Vance Foundation was her answer. It was a non-profit organization with a dual mission to provide pro bono legal and financial counseling to small business owners and employees targeted by predatory corporate practices, and to educate the next generation of business leaders on the principles of ethical governance. Her mother, Catherine, now sat at a desk by the window, a contented look on her face as she organized files. The constant stress that had plagued her health for years had vanished, replaced by a quiet pride. With the best medical care the reward money could buy her recovery had been remarkable. She volunteered at the foundation 3 days a week, her presence a constant, gentle reminder of what and who Elena had been fighting for. Elena's office was simple. The walls were lined not with awards or accolades, but with framed photographs of people the foundation had helped a family-run bakery saved from a hostile buyout, a group of factory workers who won a settlement for pension fraud, an inventor whose patent was protected from a corporate giant. Each picture was a testament to a battle won, a life restored. Her phone rang, and the caller ID brought a small smile to her face. It was Marcus Thorne. Elena, his voice came through warmer and more confident than she'd ever heard it. Just wanted to let you know our first round of recruits for the mentorship program is confirmed. We have 20 MBA students from Columbia and NYU signed up. They're all eager to learn from you. After the trial, Marcus had become a pariah on Wall Street, but Elena had offered him a different path. He now served as the Foundation's program director, his intimate knowledge of corporate malfeasance now being used to teach others how to spot and fight it. It was his penance and his redemption, and he had thrown himself into the work with a fervent dedication. That's fantastic news, Marcus, Elena said. Thank you. For everything. I should be thanking you, he replied earnestly. You saved more than one life that night at Aria. After they hung up, Elena leaned back in her chair, gazing out the window at the bustling city. Her life was unrecognizable from what it had been. The constant grinding anxiety about bills and her mother's health was gone. The heavy cloak of invisibility she had worn for 5 years had been shed. She was no longer a ghost at someone else's feast. She was the architect of her own. Sometimes, in quiet moments, She thought back to that night, to the feel of the silver water pitcher in her hand, the cold arrogance in Sterling's eyes, the taste of fear and adrenaline as she chose to speak. It felt like a scene from another person's life. The anger that had fueled her for so long had cooled, leaving behind not emptiness, but a clear, unwavering resolve. She hadn't just defeated a monster. She had refused to become one. She hadn't used her newfound power and wealth to build another empire of glass and steel, but to build a sanctuary of hope and justice. Later that afternoon, a young woman named Maria came for her appointment. She was the daughter of an immigrant family whose small software company was being systematically squeezed by a massive tech conglomerate using tactics eerily similar to Sterling's. She was terrified, overwhelmed, and on the verge of giving up. Elena sat with her, not as a powerful benefactor or a celebrated whistleblower, but as someone who understood. She listened to Maria's story, her expression, a mixture of empathy and steely focus. When Maria was finished, her eyes filled with tears of despair, Elena leaned forward. "I know this feels impossible right now." Elena began, her voice calm and reassuring. "They want you to feel that way. They are counting on your fear. They have money and power. But we have something they don't." "What's that?" Maria whispered, her voice trembling. Elena smiled, a genuine, powerful smile that reached her eyes. "The truth, and a much better understanding of forensic accounting than they think we do. Let's get to work." In that moment, she was no longer Elena Vance, the waitress, nor was she Elena Vance, the victim. She was the culmination of everything she had endured and everything she had learned. She was her father's daughter, the architect of a new legacy, proving that the quietest voice, when armed with truth and courage, could indeed change the world. In the end, it wasn't a corporate raider or a government regulator who brought down Julian Sterling. It was a single quiet voice he had arrogantly dismissed. Elena's story is a powerful reminder that there is immense strength in the people society overlooks. It shows that integrity, intelligence, and courage are weapons that no amount of wealth can defend against. She didn't seek revenge. She sought justice. And in doing so, she not only toppled a corrupt empire, but also found her own path to healing and purpose, starting a foundation to help other victims of corporate greed. If Elena's incredible journey from silent victim to unstoppable force for justice moved you, please show your support. Hit that like button to let us know you appreciate stories of courage. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of the power of one person, and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable true life stories. What did you find most inspiring about Elena's actions? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for watching.